It was happening, and I was already missing it. The conversation was still here. The light was still warm. But some part of me had already begun to grieve it. It was happening, and I was already missing it. We were in a small cafe on a Saturday afternoon. 3 of us. Mismatched chairs around a small wooden table. 1 coffee, 1 tea, 1 slice of lemon cake. The 3 of us were passing around with forks. Someone said something that made all of us laugh. Not a polite laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deeper, where being known is happening without anyone naming it. The light was coming through the front window at that particular afternoon angle, the kind of light that makes wood look warm and faces look soft. The barista was working quietly behind us. There was a small plant on our table that someone had pushed slightly toward the center. And I caught myself thinking, softly, almost apologetically, this is going to end. Not in a year. Not in a month. In about 40 minutes. The check would come. We would scrape the last bit of lemon cake. Someone would look at their phone and remember something. We would stand. We would hug. We would walk out into the afternoon. And this particular configuration of us, in this particular light, around this particular table, would be over. The conversation was still happening. I was already standing slightly outside it, watching it leave. Why does the missing arrive before the leaving does? I noticed it again that week, in smaller forms. I noticed it watching the last 20 minutes of a movie I was loving, suddenly aware that the credits were close. I noticed it on a Sunday walk in a park I'd been visiting all autumn, when one yellow leaf fell past me and I felt a small grief for a season that had not quite ended yet. I noticed it holding a cup of tea that was still hot, and feeling, somewhere in my hand, the version of the cup that would soon be cold. The cup was still warm. The tea was still good. The season was still here. The movie was still playing. But some part of me had already left them, gone forward in time, started missing them from a future room where they were no longer available. Why do I miss things while they're still happening? A quiet answer came. I once heard about a small wedding in a village I had never visited. The couple had asked a friend to take the photographs. The friend had a careful old camera, the kind that requires you to wait and decide. He moved through the day quietly, choosing his moments. There was one moment, late in the afternoon, when the bride was standing near the open back door of the village hall, alone for the first time in hours. The early evening light was crossing her shoulders. She was not smiling. She was not posing. She was just standing there, letting a long day rest on her. The friend raised the camera. He framed the shot. His finger hovered. And before he had pressed the shutter, before the moment had been captured, he was already grieving it. Not because anything bad had happened. Nothing bad had happened. The wedding had been kind. The bride had been loved. The light was perfect. He was grieving the photograph he had not yet taken. He was already missing the moment that had not yet been completed. Because somewhere inside him, he knew, even with the shutter not yet pressed, that this exact configuration of light, doorway, evening, and stillness was already on its way out of the world. So he held the camera. And he pressed the shutter. And he kept missing the moment for years, even after he had it in his hands as a photograph. Sometimes I am that person at the wedding. The light is still here. I am already taking it away in my mind. It took me a while to notice what I was actually doing. I had been telling myself I was bad at being present. That I couldn't enjoy the moment. That something in me was broken, some piece that knew how to live now, instead of always living forward. And I believed that for a long time. I read articles about mindfulness. I tried to be in my body. I told myself, this is happening, while it was happening, and even then, I noticed I was watching the happening from somewhere slightly outside it. But sitting with it longer, I began to see something else. It was not that I could not be in the moment. I was in the moment. I was just also, at the same time, already seeing the end of it. The laughter at the cafe. The warm cup. The autumn walk. The faces of people I loved. I was inside them, fully. And also, somewhere in the same body, in the same breath, I was already saying goodbye to them. Two things were happening at once. Being there. And missing it for being there. I had been calling this a failure of presence. But sitting with it, I started to wonder if it was something else. Maybe it was a kind of attention. A kind of love, even, looking at the moment so carefully that I could already see the shape of its leaving. So I asked, more carefully this time. If I am already there inside the moment, and I am also already grieving it, what is the grieving for? Another quiet answer came. Maybe you are not leaving the moment. Maybe you are trying to hold it gently, before it goes. Maybe missing is not the opposite of presence. Maybe it is one of the ways presence becomes tender. I sat with that for a long time. Because it tracked. The missing was not a withdrawal from the moment. The missing was a particular kind of presence inside it. It was the part of me that knew, really knew, in the body, that this exact thing, this light, this voice, this warmth, was finite. And the missing was the body's small, soft way of beginning to hold it before letting go. Not absence. A kind of advanced tenderness. Another small line arrived with it. Maybe missing is what love feels like when it notices time moving. That was the one I kept returning to. The cup is still warm. I am holding it carefully because I already know it will be cool. The friend is still here. I am listening carefully because I already know we will leave. The light is still on the wood. I am looking carefully because I already know the angle will turn. I am not leaving the moment. I am gathering it, in advance, into something I can carry. After a while, a quiet answer came. I once heard about a quiet old woman in a small mountain town. She had a habit, every evening, of making a single cup of tea. She would heat the water carefully. She would pour it carefully. She would set the cup on a small wooden tray near a window that faced the long blue mountains. And then, before she had even taken her first sip, she would sit down and look at the cup. She would not look at it sadly. She would look at it the way you look at a good friend who is leaving on a long trip in the morning. Sometimes she would not drink the tea right away. She would just sit with it, watching the steam rise and slow and stop. She would feel the warmth of the cup in her hands and notice, in some quiet way, that the warmth was already on its way out. A neighbor once asked why she looked at the cup that way. She answered, "I am not looking at it sadly. I am keeping company with its warmth." That was all. The neighbor did not understand then. But years later, holding a cooling cup of their own, they remembered. That is not sadness. That is a kind of company. Sometimes I drink my tea like that. Not waiting for it to cool. Not hurrying to finish before it does. Just keeping company with its warmth, while it lasts. And then something turned. I had been assuming, for a long time, that the missing while happening was a flaw. That mindful people did not do this. That if I were doing presence correctly, I would not have these small early griefs in the middle of perfectly good afternoons. But that was not what was happening. The problem was not that I was not present. The problem, if it was a problem at all, was that I was being told, by some quiet part of me, that the moment was precious. Earlier than expected. Faster than convenient. The grief in the middle of the cafe was not a failure of presence. It was a recognition. Some part of me had noticed, before the rest of me caught up, that the afternoon light on the wood, the lemon cake passing between us, the particular shape of a friend's laughter, was a kind of small treasure. And it had pressed the small grieving button early, the way you might reach for a coat early when you know the cold is coming. I was not failing the moment. I was honoring it. Sometimes it arrives early. Sometimes it arrives with more weight than I expected. But still, it is trying to honor the moment. The body has its own way of noticing that something will not be available forever. Sometimes, that noticing arrives as tenderness. So what now? Then one last quiet answer came. Maybe the moments do leave. But leaving does not make them less real. I sat with that for a while. I had been afraid that noticing the leaving would steal from the present. But it had not worked that way. The laughter had not been smaller. The tea had not been less warm. The autumn leaves had not fallen less beautifully because I knew they were the last of the season. If anything, the missing while happening had made me hold them more carefully. I once heard someone, much older than me, say it more simply, while watching the sun set over a small harbor. It is going. And it is still here. And both of those things are allowed to be true. I held that one for a long time. Because I had been treating going and still here as opposites. As if presence required pretending the leaving wasn't coming. As if grief required pretending the moment hadn't been good. But they are not opposites. They live together, inside the same warm cup, the same fading light, the same Saturday afternoon. I notice now, sometimes, when the missing arrives early. It still arrives. The cake still passes around the table. The friend still laughs. The light still turns. And occasionally, very softly, something inside me also says. The moment is leaving. But it has not left yet. And even when it does, it will not have been less real for going. And then, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I get to keep being in it. For as long as it lasts. While it lasts. Cross-reference. A Quiet Answer Episode 08. The narrator asks an ordinary question, why do I miss things while they're still happening? And follows it across the cafe Saturday afternoon, the small forms of anticipatory grief, the warm cup, the falling autumn leaf, the movie credits, the wedding photographer Fable, the voice behind the missing, the core answer, presence becomes tender, the mountain tea cup Fable, the reversal, not failing, honoring, and a final quiet acceptance that going and still here can both be true. The two fables anchor the episode in a low adult fairy tale tone, while the answering voice never instructs and only reflects. End of file.